Hi, all, I'm back. So I hope you guys feel we had a helpful and productive morning. I really want to thank our panelists for the presentations, and we've got a big afternoon ahead. Look, you've already heard from a number of organizations who are working tirelessly to make sure that the 2020 census count is fair and accurate, but our next guest is truly the definition of tireless. City Council Speaker Corey Johnson is as big a champion as New York City could possibly have in the census. Hey, Corey. So, knowing the challenges we had, he didn't waste a moment in helping our city prepare. In January, he created the 2020 Census Task Force, a group dedicated to making sure that every New Yorker is counted. He appointed Councilmember Revere, who's here, Councilmember Menchaca, as co-chairs, who have been invaluable partners. In August, the Speaker announced an early allocation of $4 million from this past budget to fund CBOs in their efforts to help turn out hard-to-count communities. Now, by the way, there is a lot of money moving around to do this well. I think the fact that he got $4 million, he was the only person to get the money out the door early at a time that it was badly needed, and you really cannot say enough about that. He has since committed an additional $12 million in funding. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Your commitment to making sure our communities are counted is really essential for the long-term health of our city. So this is going to take a massive effort, as you all know. Couldn't have a better person in this role, ladies and gentlemen. Corey Johnson, our Speaker.
Good morning. I want to thank you all for being here. Today, you all have been talking about the 2020 census, something that impacts every person in this room, as you know, and it's something that impacts every single New Yorker. I want to thank Stephen Rubenstein and Abney for their incredible leadership and hard work. A big round of applause for their leadership and for convening all of us, because when we talk about the census, what we're really talking about is the future of New York City, and it is a lot more than just a head count. It is a once in a decade chance to show the federal government that we are here and that we count. It also determines how the federal government allots more than $700 billion in federal funds nationally. $700 billion. That is a lot of money, and we have to make sure that New York gets its fair share. This is money that we need for better hospitals and schools, roads and affordable housing, and other vital services for children and for seniors. But those aren't the only reasons why we need an accurate census count. The census is also really about representation. It's data that's used to determine how many representatives we get, how congressional lines are drawn, how state legislative districts are drawn, and an undercount could potentially cost us 2 seats in Congress, which would be a disaster for us in this moment in our history. We need more people fighting against this president, not less. You may recall earlier this year, the Supreme Court blocked the Trump administration from adding a question about citizenship on the census form. This was a clear attempt, as we know, by the White House to intimidate immigrants from completing the census, and thank God it did not work. But these fear tactics have become commonplace from our federal government. You might ask, well, you may not ask, some people may ask, doesn't the White House want an accurate count? And unfortunately, the answer that we know is no. The White House constantly, as you see from these hearings that are happening right now and every day, puts politics ahead of common sense. And the president would rather further alienate immigrants and punish states where they reside rather than help them. Fortunately, that question was removed from the 2020 census by the Supreme Court, but we still have a tremendous amount of work to actually have a successful count. That wasn't the big win. The big win is us actually getting this done. And as I'm sure you've heard today, New York has historically had a low response rate. It was 62% in 2010 compared to the national average, which is 76%. And we have greater challenges that most other places across the country don't have when it comes to getting an accurate count. We have many hard-to-count populations who are already among the most vulnerable in our city: immigrants, people of color, the undocumented, low-income New Yorkers, people with limited English proficiency, and young children who we need to get counted as well. In our city, nearly 40% of the 8.6 million people who live in New York City, nearly 40% were not born in the United States of America, but came here with dreams and aspirations for themselves and for their families, and we have to make sure that every single one of them is counted. And many of those people, many of those New Yorkers come from countries where distrust in government is very, very standard. They're reluctant to give any information to the government, and the actions we see in Washington and from the White House are not helping this narrative that already exists, and that is why we have to double down on our efforts to make sure that these New Yorkers, our friends and neighbors, are actually counted. We need them to understand that it's safe to take part in the census, and we need to make sure that people know that it is a serious crime for the Census Bureau to share any individual information, any individual census data with any government agency, including immigration authorities or law enforcement. People who violate this can be fined up to $250,000 or potentially face 5 years in prison. So there is a serious crime associated with sharing any information, and we want to make sure that these hard-to-count populations know this and are educated in this way to help remove some of the fear that exists from actually filling out their census forms. And we need everyone to understand that participation means their communities get a fair share of dollars and representation in Albany and in Washington. This isn't going to be easy. That's the bad news. The good news is that we are actually ready for it, I think. Last January, the City Council formed the 2020 Census Task Force. It is co-chaired by council members Carlos Menchaca and Carlina Rivera. Carlina is here somewhere. I think she was here earlier. And it was put together to better coordinate efforts by council members and community-based organizations to conduct the kind of outreach that we need to get the word out. The council fought to allocate $40 million in this year's city budget for census efforts. I'll just remind you that that money was not put in the executive budget. We needed to fight to get it in the adopted budget because the administration wasn't on board with this at the outset. And that includes $23 million for community-based organizations to conduct outreach in neighborhoods across New York City. These organizations, as we know, are the eyes and ears of immigrant communities. They are trusted, which is the most important thing, and we need their help to get a proper and accurate count. We also successfully fought to allow non-citizens with necessary language skills to get hired by the Census Bureau, which is very, very, very important. They're also key to reaching these hard-to-count communities. The census needs to recruit at least 84,000 people to work in New York City. 84,000 people is the number that we think to conduct an accurate count all across the city. And the City Council is helping with that hiring. 14 members, council members have already held job fairs in partnership with the Census Bureau to help people apply for census jobs. But you can help too. If you remember about 10 years ago when the census was hiring, unemployment was a lot higher because the Great Recession had just happened in New York City and across the country, so it was easier to actually find people to hire. Now unemployment is at about 4.1%, and so it has become a lot harder to actually recruit people that 10 years ago were looking for work. Now it's harder to recruit those individuals that we need to conduct the count. So anyone spreading the word, anyone setting up a job fair, any organizations doing this work, it is even more important now than it was 10 years ago because of the economic situation that our city is sitting in right now. We need everyone counted, everyone in this room, everyone that you know. We need you all to spread the word, for your organizations to spread the word. In mid-March, I think you know this, but it's important to repeat it and have you all repeat this to individuals as well. In mid-March, you'll receive a packet from the Census Bureau with instructions on how to fill out the form online. The form takes about 10 minutes to answer. 10 minutes, that's it. to actually be counted. You can respond on your smartphone, via telephone, on your computer or on a tablet, and the online form and call center will be available in 12 non-English languages. If you don't respond online, you will then get a follow-up paper form in the mail, and the Census Bureau will knock on your door if you don't respond to the online call, to the form that's sent to you in the mail. Don't wait for that knock on your door, and we want you to tell that to people as well, not to wait for the knock on the door because it's wasting precious resources. We want those knocks to be really targeted knocks. Don't wait to fill out that form. Don't forget to tell your families and friends and neighbors. If you live in a building, you should go around and make sure that your neighbors are getting counted. Make sure that your super is telling people they need to get counted. That's what we want to happen, because if we don't get counted, we can lose money for hospitals. There are 3.5 million Medicaid enrollees in New York City, which is projected to account for 69% of the revenue for health and hospitals this year. For food, 1.6 million New Yorkers collect $2.8 billion in SNAP benefits across the city. For schools, our Department of Education receives $1.8 billion in federal funding that New York City kids rely upon. For housing, over 120,000 households, that's over 265,000 residents of New York City, are served by federal Section 8 vouchers, which the census achieves that number for us. And for transit, for mass transit, the MTA receives $1.5 billion annually for the current 5-year plan that the MTA is in right now. So yes, when you look at those numbers, when you talk about housing and healthcare and food insecurity and schools and mass transit, the stakes are extraordinarily high for the future of New York City. But we have an amazing team that is working together that I believe for what I believe will be a successful count. I want to thank the Office of the New York City Census 2020, led by Julie Menon, who I believe is here, some here who was here earlier. And I want to thank the 18 groups that the City Council funded in August to hit the ground running for planning for census outreach. And I want to thank all of the council members, some of whom you'll hear from today, for their amazing work in partnering with organizations at this early juncture to get an accurate count. And lastly, I want to thank, again, the Association for a Better New York, Stephen and his team, for forming a census organizing committee and for their invaluable guidance on coordination with the business community, which is so key for an accurate count. I want to thank you all for having me here today to talk about this and to help spread the word. And I want to thank this audience for you all taking important time out of your busy schedules to actually be here for this critically important issue that the city's going to be dealing with over the course of the next year, because I know you will listen to me and you're not going to want to wait for that knock on your door. I can feel it. We are the greatest city in the world, and we intend to stay that way. Every New Yorker matters. Every New Yorker makes this city great, and every New Yorker must be counted together with all of you, with the City Council, with ABNY, with the New York City Census 2020 count. We will make sure that every New Yorker is counted. So thank you all very, very much for your partnership and for making this happen. Thank you.